For several seconds, neither of us moved. People pushed shopping carts past us. A little boy begged his mother for candy. Someone dropped a bag of oranges, and they rolled across the parking lot. Everything around us continued as if nothing had happened. Inside my head, everything had stopped. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. "I think you're confusing me with someone else." She shook her head immediately. "No. Your father talked about you all the time. I haven't seen him in months." She looked genuinely confused. "That can't be right." "He always said you called every Thursday," I swallowed. "And he loved those little stories." "What stories?" "The ones about your daughter." She smiled at the memory. "The softball games, her bike, and that old dog that kept stealing food from your grill." My hands suddenly felt cold. Those weren't random stories. They were mine. Every single one. I had told them over the phone, to Vanessa. 8 months earlier, my father turned 73. He never cared about expensive presents. Every birthday, he said the same thing. "Just come by. We'll cut some pie and complain about getting old." So I took the afternoon off work. I bought his favorite pecan pie from the bakery he'd loved for years. On the way out, I grabbed a pair of leather gardening gloves because I'd noticed his old pair splitting at the fingertips the last time we'd worked in his yard together. Nothing fancy. Just things I knew he'd smile at. About 40 minutes from his house, I called Vanessa. "I'm almost there." She was quiet for a moment. "Nolan." Something in her voice made me slow down. "What?" "You shouldn't come today." I laughed. "Why not?" "Dad's exhausted." "I'll stay 15 minutes. He doesn't want company." The words didn't sound like my father, not because he always wanted visitors, because he would never have called his own son company. "I'll ask him. He's sleeping. It isn't even noon. He barely slept last night." Every answer made sense, individually. Together, they left me with nothing to argue against. I looked at the pie sitting on the passenger seat. Then I turned the car around. That evening, my phone rang. "Dad." I answered before the second ring. "Happy birthday." He chuckled softly. "You remembered." Of course I did. There was a comfortable silence. Then he asked, "So, what happened?" "What do you mean?" "I thought you were stopping by." I frowned. "I tried." "You did?" "Vanessa said you wanted a quiet day." The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to check whether the call had disconnected. Finally, he said one quiet word. "Oh." Not angry. Not confused. Just, "Oh." Before I could ask anything else, I heard Vanessa in the background. "Dad, don't stay on the phone too long." He came back. "I'll call you tomorrow." The line went dead. Tomorrow never came. At first, I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Families misunderstand each other. Schedules get messy. People get older. Life changes. That explanation worked. Until it didn't. A few weeks later, Emily had her first school play. Dad had never missed one of her performances. Not even the tiny kindergarten Christmas show where every child forgot at least half the songs. I texted him the details. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Not Dad. Vanessa. "Dad says traveling is too much right now." I replied immediately. "Can I ask him myself?" Almost instantly, she answered. "He's asleep." The next morning, Dad left a voicemail. "Nolan, I'm sorry I couldn't make it." He sounded disappointed. "I heard Emily was wonderful." I I smiled. At least he'd heard about it. Then he added, "Thank you for understanding." Understanding what? We'd never discussed it. That evening, Brooke watched me replay the voicemail for the third time. "You've listened to that 3 times." "I know." She leaned against the kitchen counter. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When was the last time you actually talked to your dad?" "I talked to him." "No." She shook her head gently. "I mean really talked to him." I started listing phone calls, birthdays, messages, updates. Halfway through, I stopped. Every conversation I remembered had started with Vanessa, ended with Vanessa, or passed through Vanessa. Brooke waited until I looked up. "See what I mean?" I nodded slowly. "I hadn't noticed." "I don't think you wanted to." The next Saturday, I decided to stop calling ahead. Dad had always loved surprises. I bought fresh coffee from the cafe he liked and drove the 3 hours to his house. His pickup truck sat in the driveway. The television flickered through the front window. Good. He was awake. Before I reached the porch, the front door opened. Vanessa stepped outside. Her smile disappeared the second she saw me. "Nolan." I figured I'd surprise him. "You should have called." "I wanted to see Dad." She glanced over her shoulder toward the living room. "Today's not a good day." "You've said that every time." "He isn't feeling well." "I'll stay 5 minutes." "No." The answer came too quickly. We both noticed it. I forced a small smile. "I drove 3 hours." "I know. So let me say hello." "He'll get overwhelmed." "I'll let him decide." She stepped into the doorway. Not aggressively, just enough to block it. "He doesn't need this today." "This?" She didn't answer. "I've done something wrong?" "No." "Then why can't I see my father?" Her eyes dropped to the porch floor. "I promised I'd keep things calm." "Who asked you to make that promise?" She looked back at me. "Dad." "I'd like to hear him say that." She slowly pulled the screen door closed between us. Not locked, just closed. A thin sheet of metal and mesh. It shouldn't have felt like a wall, but it did. I waited. 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. Then I heard it. Dad laughed. A real laugh. Warm, relaxed, the kind that always started deep in his chest. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't resting. He was talking to someone. I stepped toward the door. Vanessa immediately moved in front of it. "Nolan. Move. Please." I heard him. "He'll only get upset." I heard him laughing. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she whispered, "Please don't make today harder." "For him," I said quietly. "Or for you?" She didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I stood outside my father's front door and realized I had no idea whether I was being protected from the truth or kept away from it. I stood on the porch for another minute after Vanessa closed the screen door. I kept expecting Dad to walk around her, open the door, and ask why I was standing outside like a salesman. He never did. Eventually, I picked up the coffee I'd brought for him and carried it back to my truck. By the time I reached the driveway, it had already gone cold. Brooke was waiting when I got home. She didn't ask whether I'd seen Dad. One look at my face told her everything. "So?" I set the untouched coffee on the kitchen counter. "I never got inside." She sighed quietly. "What was the excuse this time?" "He was tired." "And you believed it?" "I wanted to." She studied me for a moment. "Nolan." "What?" "You're trying so hard to give everyone the benefit of the doubt that you're not noticing who's getting hurt." I looked down at my hands. I don't know what else I'm supposed to do. She reached across the counter and squeezed my wrist. Talk to your father. I've been trying. No. She shook her head. You've been talking to Vanessa. The next morning, I called Dad. Straight to voicemail. An hour later, I tried again. Nothing. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. Vanessa. Dad's resting. I'll let him know you called. I stared at the screen. A minute later, another message appeared. He says he loves you. I typed a reply. Can he text me himself? The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Returned. Finally, she answered. His hands are bothering him today. I read the message twice. Dad had arthritis. Some days writing was painful. That part was believable. Everything was believable. That was becoming the problem. A few days later, Emily came into my office carrying a drawing. She laid it on my desk without saying anything. Grandpa and me. That was what she'd written across the top in uneven purple letters. Will you mail it to him? I smiled. Of course. She hesitated. Is Grandpa sick? A little. Is that why he doesn't call anymore? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He used to call every Sunday, she said softly. I know. Did I do something? The question hit me harder than it should have. I pulled her into a hug. No. Then why doesn't he want to see me? I closed my eyes. Because I didn't know how to explain something I didn't understand myself. The following Wednesday, I drove to the diner where Dad had eaten breakfast almost every week for as long as I could remember. The waitress smiled the second she saw me. Nolan! It's been a while. It sure has. She poured coffee before I even ordered. Your dad always sat right over there. She pointed to the booth beside the window, the same booth he'd claimed caught the morning sun better than anywhere else. You've known him a long time? Almost 15 years, she laughed. He never stopped bragging about you. I smiled. He did? Oh, absolutely. She leaned against the counter. My favorite stories were about your Thursdays. My Thursdays? When you'd stop by after work. My smile faded. I don't stop by after work. She frowned. You don't? I live 3 hours away. Her expression slowly changed. I could have sworn... She stopped herself. What? Nothing. No, please. She looked embarrassed. I just assumed he was telling me about recent visits. What kind of visits? You'd fix something around the house. Bring homemade chili. Tell him stories about Emily. Every example she mentioned belonged to a different year, different memories, different seasons of our lives. But somehow, they'd blended together into one ongoing routine. The drive home felt strangely quiet. Not because I'd learned something new, because I hadn't. Everyone around Dad believed we still had the same relationship we'd always had. No one had actually seen it. They'd simply heard him talk about it, and no one had questioned him. Why would they? That Thursday evening, my phone finally rang. Dad. Hey, Dad. Nolan! His voice sounded brighter than it had in months. I was just thinking about the lake, I laughed. You always think about that lake. We should go again. I'd like that. So would I. For 20 minutes, we talked the way we used to. Baseball, the tomatoes in his garden, Emily's new bicycle, the neighbor who kept borrowing his ladder and forgetting to return it. It felt effortless, comfortable, like nothing had changed. Then Dad said something that made me smile. You still making that chili? Yeah. I miss that chili. I'll bring you some this weekend. I'd like that. A door closed somewhere in the background. Then I heard Vanessa. Dad? He covered the phone. I'll be there. A moment later, he came back. I've got to run. When can I see you? A pause. We'll figure it out. Then the line went dead. I kept staring at my phone. He hadn't said, ask your sister. He'd said, we'll figure it out. For the first time in months, it sounded like my father was making plans with me. I had no idea how much hope I was about to place in one simple sentence. Saturday morning, I made a fresh pot of chili. The whole kitchen smelled like garlic, onions, and smoked paprika. Brooke smiled as she packed fresh cornbread into a small container. I think he'll like this. So do I. Emily walked in carrying another drawing. This one showed the three of us fishing. Grandpa wore an enormous smile. Across the top, she'd written, "Next time together." She taped it to the lid of the container. Don't let it fall off. I won't. When I turned onto Dad's street, something felt different. His truck was in the driveway, but the house looked empty. No television, no lights, no movement behind the curtains. I knocked. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. As I stepped off the porch, the front door of the neighboring house opened. An older man I'd seen dozens of times waved at me. You looking for Sam? Yeah. He and your sister left maybe 20 minutes ago. Doctor's appointment? I think so. I thanked him and started walking toward my truck. Nolan? I turned around. You finally made it over. What do you mean? He chuckled. I was beginning to wonder where you'd disappeared to. I frowned. I've been here. He looked surprised. No, I don't think so. I came a few weeks ago. I must have missed you. I was standing right on that porch. He thought about it for a second, then shrugged. Funny. I'm usually outside every Saturday morning. His words weren't accusing. They were casual. But they stayed with me. Because if he hadn't seen me, who had everyone else been seeing? At that exact moment, my phone vibrated. A message from Vanessa. Dad's exhausted after today's appointment. Maybe give him a week before stopping by. I stared at the screen. She had no idea I was already standing in front of the house. For the first time, I stopped asking myself whether something was wrong. I started asking a different question. How long had I been living inside a story someone else was writing for my family? I didn't answer Vanessa's text. I just sat in my truck, staring at the screen until it went dark. The message wasn't unusual. That was exactly what bothered me. It sounded like every other explanation she'd given over the past 8 months. By the time I pulled into my driveway, one thought wouldn't leave me alone. Every answer had come from Vanessa. Very few had ever come from Dad. Brooke found me standing in the garage long after I'd turned off the engine. You've been sitting out here 10 minutes. I know. She leaned against the workbench. What happened? I handed her my phone. She read the message, then looked up. When did she send this? While I was standing outside Dad's house. Did she know you were already there? I don't think so. She read it again. Then she quietly asked, Did she ask where you were? No. Did she ask if you'd driven over? I shook my head. Brooke gave the phone back. She wasn't responding to you. What do you mean? She already knew what she was going to say. I frowned. Like she'd said it before? Brooke nodded. More than once. That night I couldn't sleep. Instead, I started scrolling through months of old messages. At first, I wasn't looking for anything specific. Then I noticed a pattern. Dad's resting. Today's been difficult. He's already asleep. Let's try next weekend. The doctor says he needs quiet today. Different weeks. Different situations. Almost the exact same words. I kept scrolling. The messages changed slightly. The meaning never did. Thursday evening arrived. Just after 7, my phone rang. Dad. I answered immediately. Hey. Nolan. His voice sounded stronger than it had in weeks. What are you up to? Just cleaning out the garage. He laughed. You've been cleaning that garage for 20 years. I inherited that from you. I guess you did. We talked about baseball, about Emily's softball season, about the tomatoes he'd planted too early, even though he knew a late frost might kill them. It felt normal, the way our conversations used to feel. Then he asked, Emily still drawing pictures for me? I smiled. Every chance she gets. I've got the fishing one right here. My smile disappeared. The fishing one? Yeah. The one taped to the chili. My heart skipped. Emily had taped that picture to the container I'd carried all the way to Dad's house. The container that had come home with me. Dad. Yeah? You got that drawing? Silence. Then he answered carefully. I thought, you brought it over. I never made it inside. Another long pause. Finally he said, Huh. He sounded honestly puzzled, not defensive, not confused, just surprised. I guess I mixed up my days. Before I could ask another question, I heard footsteps. Then Vanessa's voice. Dad? He lowered his voice. I've got to go. Wait. What? When was the last time you saw me? He chuckled. You ask funny questions. I'm serious. There was another pause. It hasn't been that long. How long? I don't know. A couple weeks. I closed my eyes. We hadn't seen each other in almost 8 months. Dad. Yeah? What did we do? He answered without hesitation. You fixed the loose porch step. My chest tightened. I had fixed that porch step 3 years earlier. You stayed for chili. I never brought him chili. You told me Emily wants another dog. That conversation had happened. Over the phone. With Vanessa. Not with him. He wasn't inventing memories. He was stitching together pieces of old ones. And somehow, they had become his present. When the call ended, I sat perfectly still. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether Dad remembered me. He did. He remembered me so clearly that his mind had filled in the empty spaces where I should have been. The next afternoon, I drove to my cousin Grace's house. She answered the door carrying a basket of laundry. Nolan. I was in the neighborhood. She laughed. You've never been in the neighborhood. Come inside. We sat at her kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee between us. After a few minutes, I finally asked, Can I ask you something strange? When have you ever asked anything normal? I smiled. Fair enough. Then I took a breath. Before Dad got sick, how often did you think I visited him? She answered without thinking. Every week. Why? She shrugged. That's what he always said. What exactly did he say? She thought for a moment. Oh, little things. Nolan stopped by after work. He fixed something in the garage. We watched the ball game together. Emily's getting so tall. Each sentence sounded ordinary, because each sentence had once been true. Just not recently. Did you ever actually see me there? Grace looked surprised. No. I guess I never had a reason to question it. Neither had anyone else. Dad sounded happy. He sounded loved. Why would anyone think otherwise? That evening, Brooke found me sitting on the back porch after sunset. You figured something out. I think I did. She sat beside me. What is it? I've been trying to prove Vanessa kept me away. And? I think that's only half the story. She waited. I don't think Dad believed I'd stopped visiting. She frowned. Then what did he believe? I looked out across the yard. I think someone kept telling him I was there. She didn't speak. I think every story I told Vanessa, she repeated to him. So he never felt abandoned. I nodded slowly. But neither did he realize how much time we were losing. For a long moment, we sat without speaking. Then Brooke quietly asked, "Do you think she meant to hurt either of you?" I honestly don't know anymore. That was the hardest part. The lies were real. The damage was real. But for the first time, I wasn't sure they had started out as cruelty. Sometimes the worst mistakes begin with someone trying to protect the people they love. Sometimes they grow so slowly, no one notices they've become impossible to stop. 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello? Is this Nolan Harper? Yes. My name is Diane. There was hesitation in her voice. I worked with your father's physical therapist. My pulse quickened. Is everything okay? I've gone back and forth about calling you. Why? Because I wasn't sure whether I should. She took a slow breath. The last time I saw your father, he asked me to thank you. I swallowed. For what? He said, "Tell my son he doesn't have to drive all this way every week. I'm proud he never stopped showing up." I couldn't speak, because I had driven, again and again, only to leave without seeing him. Then Diane said the sentence that finally made everything fit. Every time I visited, your father believed you just walked out the door. She paused. He wasn't pretending. He truly thought you'd been there. At that moment, I realized the lie hadn't only changed my life. Someone had quietly built an entirely different reality. For my father, too. I didn't call Vanessa that night. There was nothing left to ask over the phone. For months, I'd been chasing answers one conversation at a time, never realizing the people I trusted were living in two completely different versions of the same story. I wasn't angry anymore. Not yet. Mostly I was tired. Tired of secondhand explanations. Tired of waiting for permission to see my own father. Tired of wondering whether every memory from the last year belonged to me or to someone else's version of events. Dad passed away 11 days later. The call came just after 6 in the morning. Vanessa's voice was barely audible. He's gone. I closed my eyes. For a long moment, I couldn't answer. Not because there was nothing to say, because every word felt too late. The funeral was exactly what Dad would have wanted. Simple. No grand speeches, no dramatic music. Just family, neighbors, a few old friends from the hardware store, and the pastor who'd known him for nearly 30 years. People kept stopping me afterward. He talked about you constantly. You were a good son. He loved those Thursday visits. Each sentence landed like a stone. I smiled. I thanked them. I didn't correct anyone. There was no point. Their memories weren't really about me. They were about the version of our relationship my father had carried with him until the very end. A week later, Vanessa called. We need to go through the house. I'll be there Saturday. She was quiet for a second. Okay. No excuses. No reasons to stay away. Just, okay. It was the easiest conversation we'd had in almost a year. That alone felt strange. Walking into Dad's house without hearing him say, "Doors open," felt wrong. His reading glasses still rested beside the recliner. A crossword puzzle sat unfinished on the end table. His favorite flannel jacket still hung by the back door. The house looked as if he had simply stepped outside for a few minutes. Neither of us spoke much while we packed. We folded shirts, boxed old photo albums, wrapped dishes in newspaper. Grief has a strange way of making ordinary chores feel sacred. Around lunchtime, I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. Dad's calendar still hung beside the pantry. Most of the pages were covered with appointments: cardiologist, physical therapy, blood tests, haircuts. I almost walked away. Then something caught my eye. Every Thursday, written in the same careful handwriting, "Talk to Nolan." I turned back. There it was again. Every week. For nearly 10 months. Talk to Nolan. Talk to Nolan. Talk to Nolan. I stared at the calendar until the words blurred together. Behind me, I heard Vanessa set down another box. She already knew what I'd found. He never forgot me. My voice barely rose above a whisper. "No," she said. "He didn't. He expected my calls every Thursday." She nodded. "I know." I turned toward her. "When did this start?" She looked down at the floor. "I don't remember." "Try." For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and slowly sat down. "It started after he came home from the hospital." I waited. "He was scared." "I know. He kept asking when you were coming back." "I would have come." "I know." "Then why didn't you tell me?" She covered her face with both hands. "Because the first lie worked." The room fell silent. "What lie?" "The first afternoon." She swallowed hard. "He asked if you'd been there while he was sleeping." I didn't interrupt. I told him yes. Why? Because he relaxed. She looked up, her eyes red. He smiled and said, "I must have been more tired than I thought." She took a shaky breath, and for the first time all day, he stopped worrying. I felt something tighten in my chest. "So you did it again?" She nodded. "The next week, and the week after that. And then he started asking what you told me." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "So I repeated the stories you told me. Emily's softball games, the tomatoes, the old Labrador stealing hamburgers, the fishing trip she wanted to take, everything I'd casually shared with my sister during quick phone calls." She carried across the room to Dad, piece by piece, until he believed we'd never stop talking. "You told me he didn't want to see me." Her shoulders slumped. "I didn't know how to stop." "You could have told the truth." "I was afraid." "Of what?" "That once he realized how much time had passed, he'd think you'd abandoned him." "I never would have." "I know that now." She wiped her eyes. But every week it became harder to admit what I'd already done. The lies got bigger. She nodded. And eventually, they trapped all three of us. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't much left to say. Some mistakes don't explode all at once. They grow quietly until they're too large for anyone to carry. Before I left the house, I walked into Dad's bedroom one last time. A spiral notebook rested on his nightstand. Most of it was ordinary. Medication reminders, shopping lists, phone numbers. Near the back, I found a page dated only Thursday. In shaky handwriting, he had written, "Nolan called. Emily won another game today. Need to tell her grandpa is proud." The next page. Nolan says tomatoes finally came in. Another. Talked about the dog stealing burgers again. Still makes me laugh. I closed the notebook. My eyes burned. Dad hadn't spent his last year believing I'd disappeared. He'd spent it believing we were still sharing our lives every Thursday. The stories were real, only the visits weren't. About a month later, Vanessa asked if I'd meet her for coffee. For a long time, I looked at the message without answering. Finally, I typed one word. Okay. She looked older than I remembered. Grief had a way of doing that. "So," she said quietly, "I started seeing a therapist." I nodded. I should have done it years ago. Neither of us tried to erase what had happened. An apology couldn't give Dad back the months we'd lost. Forgiveness couldn't change the past. But pretending nothing had happened would have been one more lie. So we talked honestly for the first time in a long time. About Dad. About fear. About guilt. About how easily love can become control when you're too afraid to let go. When we stood to leave, she said, "I don't expect you to trust me again." I looked at her for a moment. "Trust isn't something you ask for." She nodded. "I know. It's something you rebuild." People still ask whether I wish I'd pushed past her and walked into Dad's house. The truth is, I think about that almost every week. Maybe I should have. Maybe I accepted too many explanations because they sounded reasonable. Maybe I confused patience with doing the right thing. I'll never know. What I do know is this. For months, I believed my father spent his final year wondering why his son had stopped coming. He didn't. In his heart, I never stopped showing up. Every Thursday, we talked. Every Thursday, he heard about Emily. Every Thursday, he laughed at the same old stories. It wasn't the life we should have had, but it was enough for him to believe, until his final days, that he was still deeply loved. Last spring, Emily asked if we could drive to the old lake. We packed sandwiches, rented a small aluminum boat, and drifted quietly across the water Dad loved so much. She looked toward the shoreline and smiled. "Grandpa would have liked today." "I think he would have." She slipped her hand into mine. Neither of us said another word. The evening breeze rippled the surface of the lake, carrying away the last light of the day. For the first time since losing him, the silence didn't feel like something had been taken from me. It felt like I was finally sharing one last quiet Thursday with my father. About 6 months later, my phone rang while I was fixing a fence in the backyard. It was a local number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Harper?" "Speaking." "My name is Melissa." She hesitated for a second. "I volunteer at Meadowbrook Senior Center." I waited. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all. I found something that belongs to you." I frowned. "I don't think we've ever met." "We haven't. But your father talked about you so often that I feel like we did." My grip tightened around the phone. "What did you find?" "A recording." 2 days later, I met her at the senior center. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was an old flash drive. "Dad recorded something?" She smiled. "Not exactly." She explained that every Thursday the center hosted a storytelling group. People were encouraged to record memories for their families. Most spoke about childhood, military service, old jobs. My father always chose a different subject. He always talked about you. That evening, Brooke and I sat at the kitchen table after Emily had gone to bed. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The video quality was poor. Dad looked thinner than I remembered. But his smile, it was exactly the same. He adjusted the camera, cleared his throat, and laughed at himself. Never could figure these things out. For a second, he looked off camera. Then he began. If Nolan ever watches this, he smiled. He'll probably tell me I should have shaved first. I laughed through my tears. That sounded exactly like him. For nearly 20 minutes, he talked. Not about being sick, not about regrets. He talked about ordinary things. The first fish we caught together. Teaching me to drive his old pickup. The time I accidentally painted the garage door shut because I didn't know it was supposed to stay open while drying. Every story ended the same way. I'm proud of that boy. Not once. Not twice. Again and again. I'm proud of him. Near the end, Dad became quiet. He looked down at his hands before speaking again. If you're watching this, it probably means I didn't get to say everything. He smiled. But that's all right. He looked directly into the camera. I've had a good life. Then he paused. The only thing I hope is that my children remember each other after I'm gone. His eyes drifted away for a moment. Families lose each other slowly. Usually one small decision at a time. Don't let that happen. The recording ended. Neither Brooke nor I moved. After a while, she reached over and closed the laptop. I think, she whispered, that message wasn't just for you. I nodded. No, it wasn't. A week later, I mailed a copy of the recording to Vanessa. There wasn't a letter inside, just one handwritten sentence. I think Dad wanted both of us to hear this. She never called. She never texted. 3 days later, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a single photograph. Dad stood between the two of us at the lake. Vanessa had written only 6 words on the back. Let's not lose each other again. This time I didn't need Thursday to remember my father. Sometimes it was a smell from a backyard grill. Sometimes it was a baseball game on television. Sometimes it was Emily laughing so hard she couldn't finish her sentence. Grief stopped arriving like a storm. Instead, it showed up quietly, in ordinary moments. And somehow, those moments hurt less than they used to. Every Thursday, just before dinner, Emily still asks me the same question. What story would have made Grandpa laugh today? Then we tell one. Not because we think he can hear it, but because some traditions are too full of love to disappear.